Sorry I had no time to record yesterday, but I'm back today with a vengeance, and honestly, I can't decide what I want to talk about. I usually try and focus on whatever I think is the most important thing going on, because that is what I am most interested in talking about, but there's so many things I want to get to. I mean, there's Putin's visit to Kherson, or Kherson, or I still have no idea how to say the name of that city. I've heard it pronounced many different ways, but it's that place down in southern Ukraine, kind of near what is Crimea, but it's on the mainland, it's not on the peninsula, and it's pretty darn far west into Ukraine. If you folks remember, the battle lines have been drawn for a very long time, kind of diagonally across Ukraine. Russia controls the Far East, and then they kind of draw a diagonal line south, and this is near kind of the edge of their triangle, so they don't control a whole lot to the north, I believe, of where Putin was, but they, control everything to the east of it, and and to the north that way, if that makes sense. And there haven't really been any advancements to speak of in many months. Things have just sort of bogged down there. But the Ruskies have yet to give up, and certainly if Putin is visiting there, it seems that they don't really have much intention of giving up these two oblasts adjacent to Crimea in sort of central Ukraine that Russia officially annexed last year, which seemed like a bold move. I mean, at the time when they did it, I thought, wow, if Putin is staking his claim and saying, okay, this is Russia now, that made me think that they were going to get out the big guns and that there was going to be a big offensive after that. And there wasn't. Things just sort of stayed the same. He just proclaimed, hey, Kherson, and what was the other one? Maybe Nikolaev, although I don't remember that's the name of the oblast, but I believe it was those two oblasts over there in the west, in addition to Donetsk and Luhansk, that Russia officially staked a claim to and said, we're going to call this Russia now. And so after doing that, it was pretty clear, okay, well, that means that they can't back out, because that would make them look very bad domestically, with the home audience. If they said, hey, this is part of Russia now, and then they abandoned it and said, yeah, we can't protect these territories anymore, that would significantly undermine the credibility of the government in the eyes of its own citizens, because they're saying, okay, well, maybe today Russia is abandoning Kherson, and tomorrow perhaps they'll abandon my city next. So Russia cannot afford to ever retreat from either of these four oblasts that they have annexed from Ukraine. They're no longer up for negotiation. Russia realistically cannot negotiate over their status. And so the fact that you now have Putin visiting this same city in the west, or central Ukraine, we could say. I mean, it's definitely not western Ukraine, but it's much further west than the Donbass. That's a reaffirmation of their commitment to incorporating these territories into the Russian Federation. And so this doesn't surprise me, but the Ruskies are not backing down. I never thought that they would back down. But for anyone on the pro-Ukrainian side who is still clinging to the idea that in the long run Ukraine can win because they can just wear down the Ruskies and eventually, they'll win a war of attrition. As the Pentagon leaks showed in the past couple of weeks, the Ruskies are killing Ukrainians at a much higher rate. So it is going to be the Ukrainians who break first. They are the ones who are being worn down the most. Now, obviously, Putin doesn't actually have to visit the front lines of the war to communicate with his generals. This is largely just a PR thing. In fact, that's almost the exclusive purpose of having a leader like Putin visit a war zone, because if you didn't include the PR benefits, the risks almost certainly outweigh the benefits. But it does help in terms of boosting the morale of the troops on the ground. That they have their great, what is he, like 5'5" leader, standing by them, and it does help the leader actually stay in touch with what's going on the ground. There is a difference between hearing about what's going on in a war zone and actually being in a war zone. It really, is going to set in better, and you're going to have a better perspective. But let's be honest, those benefits are not enough to justify putting the leader of your country in danger if you don't include, the great PR benefit of, putting it on the news screens back home, in the outside, far away from the war, in the homeland, or the motherland as they call it, showing all the folks that, hey, look, the leader is committed, and he's down there doing his job, and getting to the bottom of whatever's going on in Ukraine. So, should you read any deeper into this than that? Should you think that this is going to signal some great offensive by the Ruskies? Not necessarily. I remember many trips by U.S. presidents into the war zones in Iraq and Afghanistan in my lifetime, and it was all PR. There was nothing really going on. We were never, like on the, about to win, and the president went there, just to pat the boys on the back and say, "Atta boys, we're almost there. Keep up the good work, and it'll all be over soon." The end never came. So in the grand scheme of this war, Putin's visit to the front lines means absolutely nothing. This is par for the course when you have a war, when you have a quagmire. I do think that the Ruskies will win in time. I've said that repeatedly. I've said it ad nauseum. But doing a morale boost, I don't think it'll make Russia's victory come much quicker. Russia's victory will come as soon as the Kiev government loses its sufficient foreign support in order to keep up the fight. Perhaps there will be a mutiny eventually, although it seems to me that the Ukrainian military is very ideological, so it probably won't happen. I think it's going to be resources, not human resources. It's going to be physical resources. That's going to be what ends the war in Ukraine. When all of a sudden the West is not willing to put up as much arms. I think that there will always be some arms flowing into Ukraine, but as soon as the flow slows sufficiently to where they can't keep up the constant pressure against a Russian advance, I would suspect that will be when we see the Ukrainian lines collapse. And who knows how many tens of thousands of additional Ukrainian conscripts will be slaughtered in the meantime. Ukraine is going to have a true lost generation. I guess it'd be my generation of men in Ukraine simply will have ceased to exist for the most part by the end of this war, similar to what happened in countries after World War I. The UK in particular, a lot of people have a theory that, the collapse of the British Empire was due largely to, their lost generation that was, destroyed, obliterated during World War I. The next generation of British men who would have led the empire were largely wiped out in the trenches of World War I, and by the time the World War II, rolled around and the empire was put under stress, it was all the oldsters, like Winston Churchill, who were left running the show. And while Churchill is seen as this great leader or whatever, obviously he was one of the last prime ministers of Britain in the time that it was a true empire. It was collapsing all around him. And so after the war, Ukrainian society will take decades to recover, and the effects of this war will be remembered for generations. So with that said, considering that the Ruskies are not going home, I as much as I know I would feel differently if if I lived there and I was on that side. If that was, if Ukraine was quote unquote my side, um, I know I probably wouldn't want to surrender either. Why would you want to surrender to an enemy in a war, when it's a war at home in your own country? But rationally, there's just no other option. It's the tough decisions that the German leaders had to make at the end of World War One. Yes, the Germans back then were still technically on French territory. That's where the battle lines were. The Germans had not been pushed back into Germany. But when the fresh American troops started landing in Europe and reinforcing the French lines, the Germans knew that they were spent, they were tired, and there was no way that in the long run they were going to be able to win against a fresh force that was just getting started in the war when everyone else had been fighting since 1914. And so the only logical decision at that point was to admit defeat. They had been defeated. It was checkmate, essentially. There's no way, or there's no reason to continue playing at that point. When victory becomes impossible, you must admit your own inevitable defeat. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.